Number 4, and this is especially important when your kids start to get a little bit older. Give your kids room to breathe. What do I mean by this? There are some parents, their parenting style is the same. When the kid's a toddler, same parenting style. When it's a tween, same parenting style. When they're teenagers, same parent. Their approach to their children is the same. And that's why you see some parents, they treat their teenagers like they're toddlers, even in the way they punish them, even in the way that they speak to them. Give them a little bit of room. Don't micromanage them. Don't micromanage them. They're your child, they're not your slave. There are some parents that do not give any autonomy to their kids. Even their room. Even their room has to be decorated exactly the way that the mother wants. The kid might want to paint a wall. Nope, you can't do that. The kid wants to change his duvet, his bed cover. Nope, you can't do that. The kid wants to put the chair on this side of the room. No, you can't do that. If you suffocate your kids, if you treat them like robots with no autonomy, you're going to lose your kids. The moment that they get a car, they're not going to come back because they feel like they've been living in a prison. So you have to give them a little bit of freedom. You can't treat them like slaves, like they just don't know better. Give them a little bit of autonomy. I'm not saying give them complete freedom. It needs to be gradual. Allow them to make some choices. We have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, we speak a lot about kindness to parents. And yes, there's no doubt that we have to be respectful and dutiful to our parents. But there are some parents, through their own parenting style, they cause their children to rebel. Meaning they created the monster without realizing it. Rasulullah says, رَحِمَ اللَّهُ مَنْ أَعَانَ وَلَدَهُ عَلَى بِرِّهِ. May Allah have mercy upon that parent who aids his child in being good to him. You have a role to play in how your kids treat you. So the narrator asks, قُلْتُ كَيْفَ يُعِينُهُ عَلَى بِرِّهِ. How does a parent help the child to be good to him, to be good to the parent? The Prophet says what? يَقْبَلُ مَيْسُورًا. That you accept and you celebrate their little successes. This is so important. Wallah. There are some parents, it's only grades, that's it. You have to get an A+. If you get a B+, you sleep in the garage. You lose all of your privileges. The Prophet says, if you want to aid your child in them being good to you, acknowledge their successes, even the small successes. The small things that they do. It doesn't mean that some parents act as though the kid has to do something incredible just to get some recognition. Maybe they were struggling with a homework assignment and they just finished it. Forget about what they got on the grade. They just finished it. And it was a big deal to them. Acknowledge that small success. Maybe you have a daughter who has been struggling with hijab. And her hijab is not perfect, but she's trying. Maybe she stopped wearing makeup. She's not fully covered, but she's trying. The Prophet says, acknowledge that success. That's a success. That's progress. You might have a son who doesn't pray, and he started to do Salat al-Fajr, for example. Or Salat al-Fajr is too hard, right? So maybe Salat al-Maghrib. Salat al-Maghrib and Isha. After he comes home, he does Salat al-Maghrib and Isha. There are some parents, they say, no. They don't see Maghrib and Isha. They see you didn't pray Dhuhr, Asr and Fajr. Now I'm not saying don't pray. I'm not saying it's not important to pray. What I'm saying is acknowledge the little progress. It's better to have a son who prays Maghrib and Isha than to have a son who doesn't pray anything. Acknowledge, encourage him. We need that encouragement. You know, brothers and sisters, I remember when I was 10 years old, my grandfather, who was like a second father to me, when I was 10 years old, I was starting to become interested in religion. I was starting to read ahadith, Quran. And one day, and my grandfather started to notice that instead of just spending time playing video games and, playing basketball for hours and hanging out with my friends, he saw that there's a little bit of interest here in Quran and hadith. And I'll never forget the day. I was 10 years old and I was sitting, and I remember I was sitting on the dining room table and I was eating cereal. And I had a copy of Nahjul Balagha. Nahjul Balagha was new to me. For those of you who were born in the 80s, maybe early 90s, you remember that we didn't have iPad or anything. We used to read the back of the cereal box. We used to put it, and as we're eating, we're just reading the back of the cereal box. So on this morning, I decided to just read sermon number 1 of Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, where he speaks about God. So I was reading, and my grandfather, he came into the room and he saw me reading Nahjul Balagha. And do you know what he said to me? He could have said that, this book is too advanced. Why are you reading it? Read something more simple. He said to me, Azhar, one day you're going to become a scholar. Now, I'm not claiming to be a scholar. That's not the point of the story. The point of the story is, I'll be happy if Allah accepts me as a talib ilm. The point is, that word of encouragement ignited something inside of me that continues to burn until today. That comment motivated me many years later to go to Hawza. We don't realize how important these words of encouragement are. Maybe one word of encouragement is going to change the trajectory of a child's life. You have a daughter who's a very good writer. Acknowledge her skill. Tell her that when you grow up, if you study hard, you're going to be a phenomenal writer. You're going to change people's lives. Motivate them. You see a young boy reciting. If you work hard, young man, if you work hard, you will be the next Basim al-Karbala'i, for example. You give them these words of encouragement. It means a lot, brothers and sisters. Even Sayyid al-Khu'i, the great marji', when Sayyid al-Sistani's son used to attend his class, he was young. Sayyid al-Khu'i said about him, and this is, mentioned by some of the senior scholars in the Hawza who were classmates. They say Sayyid al-Khu'i said about one of the sons of Sayyid al-Sistani that this one day will become one of the great fuqaha of the Shia. You think that doesn't have an effect? It has huge impact. So the hadith, going back to the hadith, يَقْبَلُ مَيْسُورًا. If you want to aid your child in them being good to you, acknowledge, celebrate their small successes. وَيَتَجَاوَزْ عَنْ مَعْسُورِهِ. Overlook their failures. They're not perfect. Breaking news. Your kid's not an angel. Your kid's not infallible. Because you also weren't infallible. Sometimes we forget how we were when we were young. You get so frustrated, my son doesn't come to the masjid, my son doesn't do this, he doesn't do that. How were you when you were his age? In the 70s and the 80s, and by the way, 70s and 80s, there was no social media. It's a lot more difficult these days. You have to at least have the humility to acknowledge that it's hard, it's difficult. It's difficult to be an adult in these days, in this era, let alone a child who's trying to navigate a world that's changing so rapidly. So the Prophet says, يَقْبَلُ مَيْسُورًا وَيَتَجَاوَزْ عَنْ مَعْسُورِهِ وَلَا يُرْهِقُهُ. Don't overburden your kids. There are some parents, they overburden their kids. The kid has to go to school. Then when he comes back home from school, he has to go shopping, and then he has to come, and he has to clean his room, and he has to do this, and drop this, and pick up this, and do that. The kid becomes exhausted, tired. You robbed the kid of his childhood. You gave him so many duties that you didn't even allow the boy to be a boy. Give them room to enjoy their childhood. Believe me, they're going to have a lot of problems when they grow up. The world is very complicated. At least give them 7 years of peace. Give them 7 years. That's why the Prophet says, Al-waladu sayyidun sab'a sinin. Let kids play. Let kids enjoy for 7 years. There are some parents, the kid is 3, we've got to teach him mathematics. Baba, just leave the kid alone. Shouldn't mathematics. Ta'aleem, leave it 7 and beyond. Allow them to play and enjoy, because if people don't play and get it out of their system, they play later. They play later. And they become very abnormal. They don't get it out of their system. They become immature adults. Let them get it out of their system. وَلَا يَخْرَقُ بِهِ. And a parent who aids their child so that they do good to them is a parent that does not insult the intelligence of their child. Don't call your child a fool. If your child messes up, don't say you're stupid, you're not smart, you're dumb, you're foolish. Just like words of encouragement are downloaded into their conscience, hurtful words, they get buried very deep in there. They don't leave. It's a deep wound that you leave. So if your kids are misbehaving, sometimes you have to ask, did I contribute to the problem?